Could Nick Saban actually come out of retirement to return to LSU? I've got some thoughts locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked On LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get great podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. And as always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. So LSU is in the market for a new football coach. And if you're an everydayer, shout out. Thank you. You've heard a lot of the conversations we've had. We've gone through some of the betting odds for some of the maybe prohibitive favorites. We've talked about some of the big names, Lane Kiffin, Dan Lanning, Joe Brady potentially as well. We've talked about John Sumrall from Tulane, who also spoke on the job, which you'll hear a little bit later today. We've also talked about a path how Frank Wilson could get the job on a permanent basis. But there's one gigantic Mount Rushmore-sized name that lingers. And silly as it may sound, there may actually be a path to getting Nick Saban to return to LSU. Now, I want to be very clear as we start. I'm not coming at this with some false pretense. I'm not telling you it's likely to happen. I don't believe it is likely to happen. As a matter of fact, the betting odds for Nick Saban to be the next coach at LSU are plus 7,500, meaning you'd have to bet $7,500 to win $100. So this is one of the longest of long shots out there. But whenever the conversations that are being had around Nick are being had, it's at least worth discussing here about how it could potentially look. Okay, so I don't want it to come across with some false pretense where you think I'm pitching that Nick Saban's going to be the coach. I'm not saying that, but I will discuss this coaching search from every possibility. There's enough people asking about Saban, and I can lay out a path for you how this could work, and we'll talk about it. First, though, let me tell you why I think this becomes somewhat relevant today. So after Brian Kelly was fired, Paul Feinbaum doing a hit on ESPN on one of their platforms, and he's asked about Nick Saban to LSU. Now, this makes a lot of sense, of course. Nick Saban was the coach at LSU from 2000 to 2004. As we all know, he won the program's first national title in 45 years, and then he terrorized LSU for a decade and a half while he was the coach at Alabama. But Feinbaum, who, of course, was rooted in Alabama for many years in WJOX in Birmingham before moving to the SEC network, knows Nick Saban personally, professionally, has for a long time. After Brian Kelly was fired, Paul Feinbaum said this on ESPN about Nick Saban possibly going to LSU.
Saban wouldn't talk to Penn State. He wouldn't talk to Florida. But I think he would talk to LSU, at least to see what they have to offer. And by the way, sometimes you can come back and make an offer that even a man who will be 74 years old on Halloween might consider. I think it's worth thinking about. And I'm already hearing on our show down here in the South, Alabama fans saying, please tell me it's not true. Don't tell me that Nick Saban's going to LSU.
It would be one of the most epic about-face moves ever. If Nick Saban retires from his legendary career at Alabama, only to sit out a couple of seasons, jump back in the SEC at LSU, the place, of course, that he once awoken with the national championship back in 2003. But you can't finish a deal without first having a conversation. And it is worth mentioning that Nick Saban's agent, Jimmy Sexton, is sort of the super agent of the coaches and is always out there looking for deals. And a lot of times it's just leveraging what interest might be there for his current client to get a better deal where they are. Lane Kiffin is a Jimmy Sexton client. And, it's certainly Jimmy Sexton with a lot of interest from potentially LSU and Florida and Penn State in this hiring cycle is going to negotiate an amazing deal for Lane Kiffin, be it staying at Ole Miss or where he goes. But the point is, there's also a relationship, a very real relationship that exists still with LSU and Nick Saban that I'll get to in a second. But a little more context. Saban, for what it's worth, was on the Pat McAfee show and made it pretty clear that he doesn't want to coach again, but there might be other influences.
I want to stay retired. And I do not want him anywhere near Miss Terry. Because when she hears some of these numbers, she gets interested. And I am interested.
You heard him say, I'm not, we talked about his wife, Terry Saban, Miss Terry, as they affectionately call her, and said Jimmy doesn't want Jimmy Sexton anywhere near Miss Terry because they start talking about the numbers. She gets interested and he's not interested. So I believe Nick Saban when he says he's out, he wants to stay in college. I don't know that he was aching to leave college football, but as it's been discussed many times over, the changes in college football, NIL portal, all the things that are working against some of the older school legacy coaches that wanted to recruit and develop, the game has changed tremendously. That's not to say Nick couldn't still succeed in it. I believe he very much could. Why I believe he's the greatest coach of all time is because there has never been a coach have the level of success he did in such a transformative period. Remember, Nick Saban was in the SEC at a time where you ended up having an SEC championship game, a BCS championship game, ultimately a 4-team college football playoff, had to deal with NIL, transfer portal. There was a hard cap on 25 signees in your signing class, roster limits. It's not like when Bear Bryant coached in the 70s and there were no roster limits, there were no scholarship limits, sign as many guys as you want. Saban evolved every time the game evolved from a guy that was so adamantly opposed to the hurry up, no huddle, then ended up hiring Lane Kiffin and adapting and did it better than anyone because he wanted to win, so he was always willing to adapt. I believe Nick Saban's process, he will adapt to this era if he wanted to be in it and would win. It's a question of does he want to be in it? Now, the numbers, I think, are very important. But the other part about LSU that's important is something that Nick Saban said on The Pivot. Remember the Pivot podcast with former LSU Tiger Ryan Clark, Channing Crowder, Fred Taylor. This was before this most recent football season. Nick Saban was a guest on The Pivot, and he talked about the biggest mistake he ever made in his coaching career.
When I left LSU, that was probably professionally the biggest mistake that I ever made. Not because we didn't have success in Miami, because I enjoyed coaching in Miami, but I found out in that experience that I like coaching in college better because you could develop players personally, academically, athletically, and all that a little more than in pro ball. Even though I love the status of coaching in pro football and the kind of guys you coached and you're coaching in the best league against the best players, I loved all that. So then I can't go back to LSU, go to Alabama, and no disrespect to Alabama. It's not Alabama versus LSU. It's just Jimmy Sexton stood on the balcony when I was getting ready to leave LSU and make a decision about whether I went to Miami or stayed at LSU. And he said, what do you want your legacy to be as a coach? Do you want to be Vince Lombardi or do you want to be Bear Bryant? And without hesitation, I said Bear Bryant. And he said, what are you doing going to Miami then? That's true. I don't know if I ever told that story, but that's the truth. We outside of Skip Bertman's office on the balcony, and I went anyway.
You can tell that Nick Saban has deep love, affection, and appreciation for LSU. It gave him the amazing opportunity that he had to launch his career the way he did. And obviously people here loved him and he had great success here for all the reasons you can have success at LSU. So there is, when he says the biggest mistake of his career was leaving LSU, I think some of that's 20 years later. And it still lingers for Nick Saban. So maybe a little bit of ego of the opportunity to go back and do it again at a third quote unquote different place at LSU again, but for a second time. That's a fascinating challenge. And I don't know that Nick Saban will ever get back into coaching. As you heard in the clip from Paul Feinbaum, on Halloween, Nick Saban will turn 74 years old. But there is a way to structure this to make it work both for LSU and for Nick Saban in the short term. And I'll explain how that could look when we come back here. It's Locked On LSU, your team every day. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. And Mazda brings this same intention to how they craft every model. You can feel the Japanese craftsmanship in every detail. From the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery, like our players, Mazda sweats every detail because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda. Move and be moved. And today's show is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. It's their most advanced equipment yet, designed to give you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or cross-training with your favorite instructors. This is training reimagined. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with tools that help you plan, stay motivated, and reach peak performance. The swivel screen, it's a game changer. You can go from running to on the tread plus to strength training without missing a beat. So let yourself run, lift, flex, and push forward. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus today at onepeloton.com. I mentioned that there was a tie that could connect Nick Saban's past and present at LSU, and that, of course, is current LSU athletic director Scott Woodward. Remember, when Nick Saban was hired back in 2000 to be late 1999, to be LSU's coach starting in the 2000 season, Joe Dean was the athletic director. Mark Emmert was the chancellor at LSU, of course, later became the president of the NCAA. But Mark Emmert was the chancellor. And Emmert, his liaison between the athletic department and the university and also the state capitol was Scott Woodward. Scott Woodward also had a great relationship at that time with Verge Osbury, who's a current LSU associate AD who has been in that role for several decades now. So the fact that Scott Woodward could pick up the phone and call Jimmy Sexton or Nick Saban, of course, because their personal relationship, and at least have the conversation, as Paul Feinbaum discussed, is a very real thing. It's not just LSU, it's that the people that were at the center of having Nick at LSU the first time 20 years ago, there are some of those connective tissues that still exist where even if just a courtesy, you could have that phone call. Remember, Scott Woodward also did the deal with Jimmy Sexton for Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, which I know a lot of people lay that at the feet of Scott Woodward. I have and will always continue to say the problem with Jimbo's contract was not the contract that Scott Woodward did. The problem with Jimbo at A&M was the fact that Ross Bjork, who replaced Scott Woodward, gave Jimbo an extension after the COVID year, and that's what they ended up buying out. Gigantic misconception about the buyout and Scott and how it all factored in. Anyway, I'm not neither here nor there, not trying to get too deep into the weeds with that. But the point being, Scott Woodward and Jimmy Sexton have a longstanding relationship. Scott Woodward and Nick Saban have a quarter-century longstanding relationship. The lines of communication there are at least open. And then you could look at how this would work. Remember, if you're LSU and what you're trying to avoid is another $100 million contract, like what you just gave Brian Kelly and now are buying him out of, the way you're going to get to a $100 million deal is a long-term deal. Nick Saban most certainly does not want a 10-year contract. At 74 years old, it's hard to imagine him coaching into his middle 80s. But would Nick Saban do a 3-year guaranteed deal at a record-breaking number? For example, what if Nick Saban was offered a 3-year, $60 million deal, $20 million per year? Now, that's a number that would shatter every record for a coach, but it's a short enough runway to say, could Nick come here and within 3 years, remember, Les Miles won a title in his third year, Ed Ogeron won a title in his third year, Nick won his title back in 2003 in year 4, but he inherited a really terrible situation, culturally, roster-wise, everything from Jerry DiNardo. It's actually more comparable to what Brian Kelly inherited from Ed Ogeron at the end, where you had back-to-back non-winning seasons and a roster that had been totally decimated, 38 scholarship players at the time. But it's in a much more stable spot now than what Brian Kelly inherited from Ed Ogeron, to where it wouldn't have to be a complete and total overhaul. Plus, the money people, the boosters around LSU, you don't think they would sprint to open up their checkbooks to spend $60 million to bring Nick Saban back on a short-term deal and then give him whatever he needed to win by way of roster, NIL, revenue share, of course, is already baked in, but what collective donations, whatever it may be, transfer portal, you don't think that LSU's power people wouldn't line up not only to get Nick Saban back, to get back to winning quickly, and to stick it to Alabama. Oh, give them the opportunity. Now, again, the betting odds are plus 7,500 on Nick Saban being the next LSU coach. And a few days before his 74th birthday, as we record this, I do not believe this is going to happen. But again, we're going to have every conversation around this coaching search until we know what direction LSU is going and we can really hone in on it. And we're going to discuss what possibilities exist. Again, I don't think that there is a great possibility. I do think that Nick Saban has regret about leaving LSU 20 years ago. He said it. I do know that Nick Saban has a great relationship with both Scott Woodward and Scott Woodward has a relationship with both Nick Saban and Jimmy Sexton, so where you could at least have that phone call. I do not necessarily believe Scott Woodward's making this hire unless it's Nick Saban, which, of course, you would do in an instant. It's at least worth considering and having that conversation. So the other, maybe more, call it realistic candidates that have spoken about the job this week, Kenny Dillingham from Arizona State and John Sumrall from Tulane, both during their media availability, were asked about it. Sumrall, for what it's worth, at plus 150 is the betting favorite to be the next LSU coach. Here was his non-denial denial.
You got a job to do. You got to ask that question. I got a job to do. It's to coach the Tulane football team. I've dealt with it every year as a head coach. I understand it comes with the territory. I get those questions because we're having success. That's about our players. And the coaching carousel to me is not even a thought because we're in the mid-season phase. So whatever somebody else wants to do, another program wants to do, what people want to speculate, they're free to do that. UTSA has my 100% focus. Our team playing the best they can has my 100% focus.
By the way, John Sumrall played collegiately he's from Texarkana, Texas. He played collegiately at Kentucky, started his coaching career right when his playing career ended as a GA at Kentucky. And he has been the guy that's bounced around. Position coach at the University of San Diego. He jumped to Tulane in 2012, where he was a co-DC and coached linebackers and defensive line. Then he went to Troy as an associate head coach, jumped into the SEC in 2018 as the linebackers coach at Ole Miss. Then went back to Kentucky for 3 seasons, got his first head coaching job at Troy, and it was there in 2022, 2023, and then replaced Willie Fritz at Tulane in 2024. Look, 3 seasons now in his 4th season as a head coach, he's had immense success. First year at Troy went 12-2. Second year at Troy went 11-2. Goes to Tulane. First year at Tulane, he goes 9-5. They went 9-5, finished second in the conference and lost the bowl game. So 9-3, lost the conference championship and the bowl game. And this year, to start the season, they're 6-1. In his 4th season as a head coach, he's 38-10. He's had a really strong start to his career. He's also 43 years old. He's 3 days older than me, incidentally. But what's interesting is you're talking about a guy who played in the SEC, has coached in the SEC, has been a position coach, a coordinator, and now a head coach at 2 different stops, has had success, and very much understands the current culture in college football and what it takes to win in the portal era. Just look at what happened with the quarterback situation, where they had Darian Mensah at Tulane. He enters the portal, goes and signs a big NIL deal at Duke. Then what does Tulane do? They get Retzlaff from BYU. He's playing the game. John Sumrall is very willing to play the game in this portal era, NIL, rev share era. And if you give that guy with that energy, that attitude, the right resources, I think he could be an awesome hire for LSU. He is giving the non-denial denial because that's what coaches have to do. Reporters have to ask the question. Coaches have to dodge the question. There's only a few ways you can answer it. You can either deny it the way Nick Saban did when he said, I'm not going to be the Alabama coach, but you paint yourself in the corner. You can not deny it, which is to say you do have interest, or you can give the non-denial denial, which is what Sumrall did. And by not denying it, he denied it without denying it effectively. So as to leave the door open. Now, Kenny Dillingham is the other coach. He's at Arizona State, another young guy. Dillingham met with reporters. He was asked about potential LSU interest.
I'm trying to win as many games as I can here. That is my number one focus, is our players, our football team, everything about us. That's simple. Like, I am so singularly focused on us to win football games, to become a better football team, this season. Like, that's my singular focus.
So again, not in any way denying it, not addressing it. That is a non-denial denial. But Dillingham is another interesting one. This is a bright offensive guy. He played collegiately at Arizona State, started as a high school coach, then jumped in as an offensive analyst at Arizona State in 2014. He spent time at Memphis, then as the OC at Auburn, OC at Florida State, OC at Oregon. So he has had some really big coordinator jobs, and then got the head coaching job at Arizona State, his alma mater, in 2023. And he's only 35 years old. So you're talking about a guy who got his first coordinator position when he was still in his 20s. So a young guy at 35 years old who's now in his third season at Arizona State. He inherited a terrible situation from Herm Edwards. They went 3-9 in year one. In year two, flipped it, 11-3. They make the college football, they win the Big 12. They make the college football playoff, lose that amazing game to Texas in the Peach Bowl. And then this year so far, a little bit of a disappointing start at a 5-3 start, where they had a rough loss, or an early loss to Mississippi State, which was disappointing, but a really impressive win a couple of weeks ago against SMU. So you're looking at another guy there who's a young, offensive-minded coach who very much understands the current state of college football and how to win in the current state of college football. LSU is going to have a lot of great options because LSU is a desirable place to be. Dillingham, Sumrall, possibly Nick Saban, a few worth keeping an eye on in the coming days and weeks. All right, it's going to do it for us here in this bonus edition of Locked on LSU. Hey, do us a favor, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you're on YouTube. If you're listening on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. And remember, you can always watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network, all along the Gulf South. You can look for your listings at in your local market. We appreciate that partnership as well. Hey, be sure to let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you here every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.